at the Richmond airport, and I went up to the car rental counter, and she said, "You're not from here, are you?" And I said, "No." She said, "You have a very interesting accent." I said, "I was thinking the same thing about you." But I am very, very glad to be here. I have was invited to come to about 3 years ago. Julie, Kitty, we all met in Gettysburg at the American Rose Society National Convention, and they said, "You have to come to Richmond. You have to come to Richmond." And it took me 3 years to get here, but I'm here today, and I'm very glad for that. My name is Chris Van Cleve. I write and travel the country under the name of the Redneck Rosarian. And I'll tell you how that started. It started in my backyard probably about 15, 16 years ago. I began to keep a handwritten journal about my garden in a spiral notebook. And from that turned into a blog. And that blog, I was just a chronicle of, my Mr. Lincoln wasn't looking too hot that day, to, what tomatoes were doing well in my garden. And that blog turned into invitations to come and speak. And then a local television station said, "Chris, come do our gardening program for us." So I do the local Fox Affiliates gardening program quarterly, and it's a lot of fun. But my first passion has always been the rose. I'll tell you, I grew roses. My mama grew roses. Her mama grew roses. Her mama grew roses. And from what I can detect, her mama grew roses. And that'll take us all the way back to the pre-Civil War days in this country. And it has been a long standing family tradition to grow roses. Now, I grow roses in a vastly different manner than my great-great-grandmother did. They grew, the Chinas and the teas that we see even in this garden today and in my garden at home, but they didn't have all the modern hybrids that we see and enjoy today. How many exhibitors do we have here today? We've got quite a number of exhibitors. And then some that are just backyard gardeners and just garden for the love of the rose. And no matter what your skill level is, there's a place for you, I know, in this Rose Society and in the American Rose Society and amongst rose people, because I'll tell you, rose folks will take care of one another. They will not only come and like Joan said, they'll come dig in your garden and help you put your markers out and do all sorts of stuff. But it's that camaraderie and support that we all need as gardeners. And I just want to encourage you guys today to continue to do that. We've been sheltered in place, and I don't know about y'all, but I'm so tired of wearing these masks, I don't know my name. But it's good to see everyone's face today in person and not be so sequestered after such a long period of time. Now, when I first got married and bought my first home in Nashville, Tennessee, is where I grew up, I began to cultivate a garden there, and someone asked me a few days after I moved, "Have you met Miss Dodd?" And I said, "No, who's Miss Dodd?" And they said, "She is the meanest woman alive." And I said, "No, I don't believe I met her." And he said, "She lives right across the street from you." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, I look forward to meeting her," very sarcastically. Well, as it turns out, about 3 days later, my telephone rang, and I answered the phone, and this gravelly voice said, "Mr. Van Cleve?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "This is Lucille Dodd." And I thought, the meanest woman alive has my telephone number. And she said, all of your leaves have blown over from your trees into my front yard, and I want you to come over here and rake them up." She just hung the phone up. And I thought, well, what's a Southern boy to do? So I grabbed my rake and go across the street. I thought, I don't know her. She might burn my house down. I don't know. If she's really that mean. So I went over and I began to rake up her leaves, and it was 10 or 15 minutes. She came out from the side of her house on a walker. And she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, Miss Dodd, I'm raking up your leaves." And she said, "Well, I didn't want you to do that." And, what I found was Miss Dodd really wasn't the meanest woman alive. She was probably one of the loneliest people I'd ever met. And so, I made a decision right then and there that day I was just going to befriend her. And she and I became friends, and she grew beautiful forsythia bushes. Anybody love forsythia? Do y'all grow forsythia up here? To me that says springs are coming when the forsythia blooms. And she grew those, and she had beautiful hydrangeas, and I had even more beautiful hydrangeas. And she would threaten to come over in the night and snip off all my blooms so I wouldn't upstage her. So in the course of that conversation, I told her I wanted to grow some roses. And she said, well, I don't know why you want to do that. You don't take care of the rose that you have. And I said, well, I don't have any roses. And she said, you've been mowing over one since the day you moved there. She said, I know, I watch your house. So we walked across the street, and she said, there's a rose right there. And I started digging, pulling back the grass, and there's a root ball about that big. And she said, you need to start fertilizing this root ball, this stump. And I did. And within 6 months, I had about a 7-foot Don Juan climber that I had to trellis. I saw that trellis, it reminded me of the one that I had. And it just proved to me that roses really are one of the most resilient plants on the planet. That despite our mistreatment of them sometimes, and as we walk through the Hollywood Cemetery today, I saw, some of these roses for more than 100 years have only gotten the care that fell from God's open sky. And that alone, and they just thrive in that environment. So, roses really are a resilient plant. And a friend of mine told me one time, Chris, it's only been about the last 150 years that we've been picking on them, that we started hybridizing them, and in doing so, sometimes we've introduced diseases and that sort of thing for them. But for the most part, they just grow on their own. So what do you look for when you buy a rose? For me, when I go to the home center, once upon a time when I was really young, if there was some pretty color in the garden, or some pretty color in the garden center, I just would buy the pretty color and take it home, and then it would end up being a monster in the front of my bed, and I'd make a mistake, and so a little bit of education goes a long way. So what do you look for? Some questions you have to ask yourself is how large you want that plant to be. How much sun do you have? Do you have 4 to 6 hours of really good sun a day? And if you've got a little bit more than that, that's even better. Do you have a soil that drains well? Roses love water, they just hate wet feet. And how do you do that? How do you do a drain test? Does anybody do a drain test? When in Alabama, it's clay. So you dig, you get your spade in the ground, and it's Play-Doh. So we've got some drainage issues. So Ms. Joan, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do it. We have clay about 12 inches down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to make sure to break it up wherever I'm putting a rose in. But as far as the drain test, I just fill the hole with water and watch it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. If it dissipates within 30 minutes to an hour, you can probably plant there. If it doesn't, like you said, you got to continue to break up that soil and amend it, or move to higher ground. A lot of people now are growing roses in raised beds. I started a brand new garden this spring. Sold my house that had 200 shrubs in the ground, about a 15-year-old garden, and sold that house and moved to a new house with twice the garden space. And so I'm starting all over again. So I'm relearning these lessons that I'm talking about today as I begin to dig in this yard and getting the clay, and I'm pouring the water in those holes to make sure that I can actually plant there. Or do I need to do raised beds? In my other garden, I had 3 large raised beds that I had 6 shrubs each in, and those are my hybrid tea and floribunda beds. And when I built those raised beds, they're about the size of this table and about 2.5 foot tall, and I filled them with my own soil, with the soil that I created, so to speak. I use very good soil mix that I use is just regular good topsoil, composted cow manure, and mini pine bark nuggets. What type of mulch? Y'all have? Can you get pine bark nuggets here?
You can. You have to buy it mostly, but
yeah.
Frankly, I'm using mulch from the dump.
Using it from the dump? Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times they chop up Christmas trees and do stuff like that. Yeah, and you know that type of a mixture gives you a very friable soil. I'm noticing this soil over here is optimal for growing roses when you look at it. Do y'all mind if I go grab some dirt? You've got mulch, you've got that fine soil, and you mix in a little composted manure with that, either cow or horse manure. Please don't use the fresh. Please let it please let it compost a little bit. Manures. At least 2 years.
We used to use it on the plantation.
Yeah, 2 years, about 2 years, yeah. I was very lucky to live in front, my neighborhood was in front of a horse farm. And you know, they were very willing to let me come shovel out their stalls. Yeah, and when I told them I was a rose grower, they were like, okay. They kind of got the connection. They even started growing some roses as a result of us going up there. But they really wanted us to use that byproduct of the horses that they trained. And we put it out in a pile, and you know, it goes through this heating process, and when it begins to decompose, that's when the magic starts happening as far as that. And I will be giving away today. This is actually a soil conditioner. I think these are all alfalfa, but it comes in horse and cow manure too. It's called Moo Poo Tea. Y'all ever heard of this? Yeah. It's and this is Annie Havens, yeah. And this is composted alfalfa meal, and you can just drop it in a 5-gallon bucket and let it steep and make your alfalfa tea. You can even add to this anybody use Epsom salts in the spring? Yeah, you can add that to it. All of your spring mix, you kind of add it to it, and you can reuse this tea bag until the bag just falls apart. But it's a very, very good product to have. And the horse and the cow manure are excellent, excellent fertilizers. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, do you have 4 to 6 hours of sun? What types of shrubs do you want? Do you want big shrubs? Do you want little shrubs? How many of you ever bought a miniature rose and for a small space? Yeah, I've done that. Bought a whole bunch one time, planted them, and I thought, oh, this would be wonderful in my front border. And within 9 months, they had taken over all of the boxwoods that were behind them. So those all came up and got planted elsewhere in the garden. And you know, it's that education of learning that when it says a miniature rose, it's referring to the bloom and not the size of the shrub. Well, and how do you learn things like that? If you're a consumer that doesn't know that a rose society even exists, how do you learn that? You know, and people are taking to the internet today. I call this whole new generation that's coming along, I call them iPhone gardeners, because they'll get on their phone and Google something before they'll drive and show up at a meeting somewhere. So that's another talk that I do about having a presence on the internet. So when people Google growing roses in Richmond, y'all pop up, and y'all have that already, a great Facebook presence. So it's always a very good thing. So talk a little bit about water. When you talk about watering, how often do y'all water your roses?
Depends.
Depends?
Depends. Cool weather, 1 day a week. Hot weather, 3 days a week.
3 days a week?
Yeah.
Yeah. And even more often if you got them growing in containers?
Well, no, I've got them. Most of my roses are in raised beds.
In raised beds? Yeah.
I have a drip work system.
Yeah. How many?
When you put new ones in, I just put 25 in.
Put 25 in?
I've done it every night.
Yeah. First week I'd water them every night, and the second week I'd kind of taper that off to about every other, and then by the end of the month they should have put down some roots, and they should be pretty much
Have you ever
on a
tried
regular.
this new Scott's Miracle-Gro garden soil? It's got its own.
Yeah, I have, and
That's what I put down on mine.
yeah.
But mine's on an old mulberry bush roots.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I put it on. They're doing good with the mulberry
Yeah.
underneath it.
Good. Good. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yeah. When you water roses, do you water the whole rose plant or just at the base of the soil?
Best practice is to water at the base of the plant, and that is because roses are prone to get diseases, like the gentleman spoke about black spot. And black spot is a mold-borne illness. So if you wet the plant, then the chances of it getting black spot are even greater. Yeah, yeah. So So when I call this section of my presentation an ounce of prevention. I stopped really spraying my garden about 4 or 5 years ago. And I did that because of the wildlife and all sorts of other personal reasons. And I'm not advocating that you do that, because we all have a personal choice to make. And depending on where we are in our rose growing journey, you've got to make that decision whether or not you're going to spray your garden. But I cut down probably 50% of the black spot in my garden just by what I call good housekeeping. Keeping my beds clean. If we have diseased leaves, and I'm out in my garden every single day. I'm an early riser. I'm usually up and out about 5:15 every morning, and I'm walking the garden, and I tell people I'm out there looking for trouble. If I find diseased leaves, I'm pulling it off, putting it in a bucket. If I'm seeing strange growth on a plant or around the base of the plant, I'm investigating it. I'm being proactive with the garden instead of being reactive. A lot of folks will go out and they'll say, "Oh, all of my shrubs are covered in black spot. What do I do?" Well, that little bit of education comes in where you know that most roses are prone to black spot. Can I just tell you that even the knockout rose is prone to some black spot? And even though they sell that as a disease-free shrub, it still gets black spot. So if we all know that, then can you do anything that's preventative? So I always pull those diseased leaves. Any diseased leaves that fall to the ground, they will hide in your garden if you don't pick them up, and they will come back and get you later on in the season, or they'll overwinter in your garden and come back to get you the next year. So I do a good lime sulfur spray, which is a very organic. It's not going to hurt the bees or anything like that in your garden. And I do that in Alabama. We have what I call 4 days of winter, and it's not 4 days in a row. We'll have a freezing day in January and one in March, and then we just had a freezing day in April. And then that's about it. We don't get a lot of cold weather, but I pick one of those very cold days to spray that. Yes, sir?
You spray it to change the pH on the surface of the...
Well, it will actually, lime sulfur will kill that mold spore, the black spot, on contact. So I spray that to kill those mold spores on contact. And I spray the entire shrub, top to bottom, and I spray the ground around it, because there are leaves that inevitably will show up in the garden after that. That is my preventative before the season ever starts. So I feel like I'm starting at least with a clean slate. How many of you need a clean slate? I need a clean slate in my garden. So, yeah, see? Yeah.
Got a knockout right over there that's got some black spots.
See?
It would take us years to get to a clean spray.
Yeah, no.
Why one of those winter days?
Well, lime sulfur can burn your plants. Yeah, so if it's too hot outside, it can burn your shrubs. And can I just tell you, I learned that from experience. I had a Just Joey. Anybody ever grow Just Joey? Yeah, love that rose. And I sprayed it one morning, and I had missed it when I was spraying, and I came back and it had warmed up the next day, and I killed that shrub. The sulfur just killed it. It was too warm. Yeah. So Kitty was saying that she had not had some good luck with roses so far, and she said, "I'm just going to stop." And I'm like, "No, you're not." And I'm like, the whole garden is about your experience. It's about how you get in there and you dig and you prune and you enjoy those blooms and you enter them into shows and you learn the entire time. So can I just tell you that when Southern Living came to photograph my garden a couple of years ago, people said, "Oh, you have arrived in the gardening world," when they come to photograph your house. And can I just tell you, I was scared out of my mind. I said I could find every flaw in my garden, and they're like, "Chris, nobody sees that but you." And when you pay that much attention to your garden, that nobody sees the flaws unless you point them out to them. People are just going to come and love what you do. And so just remember that. Grow the things that you love in your garden and enjoy them. but put the work in to make it pretty as well. So,
On the line thing, you said it kills it on contact. Is there residual killing as it stays on the leaf?
no, it typically not. Once it's on there and it dries, then whatever it's killed, it's there.
No, but I mean for new.
Yeah, it's not going to. Yeah, the new growth, it's not going to be affected by that. So if you spray at that point, you would want to spray them.
But the sprays on the leaf, will new spores from black spot be killed when it attaches?
On the sprayed leaves, yes. Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. Yeah. No, you're fine. You're fine.
Chris, could I interrupt and make a quick comment?
Sure.
This garden is no spray. I had intended this year to start spraying at least for black spot, and it didn't happen because I was sick. So what you see is a garden if you spray nothing. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Yep. It's a. Yes, ma'am.
When you're talking about spraying on a cold day, is it a particular day before spring or just a cold day before everything warms up?
I would spray on a day where it does not get too much above freezing. Yeah.
Don used to spray, lime, sulfur. You do it very early. That'd be your very first spray of the season. No leaves on it, still cold, and it just get the ground really saturated well, and the branches and the canes.
Mhm.
Canes.
Yep.
I was just thinking, if you're spraying a sulfur compound,
Mhm.
when it mixes water, it turns into sulfuric acid.
Yeah. Could.
So
It's a science experiment in your garden. Yeah.
Right. So that early means you're not going to burn things with acid if it's a little too strong.
Yeah.
That's really what you're saying.
Yeah. Because the heat really activates it. So, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions?
So would a cloudy day, if you don't have another cold, be all right?
Yeah. If it's already reaching 80 degrees now, I wouldn't spray it, just to be safe. Yes, ma'am.
I spray neem. I mean, someone made a joke out of neem so you could drink it. I don't know if you can or not.
Yeah.
That week.
I wouldn't try it. No.
But I spray in the afternoon. Like 6, 7 o'clock.
Mhm.
Is that fine?
Yeah. Yeah.
Fine for me.
Right. Yeah. If you can spray at any time. People who spray for black spot, manzate, those types of chemicals, anything that they're afraid that might harm the birds or the bees, there's a pattern to when they come and go in your garden, and different times of the day they're not there. And once it's applied, it's not going to harm them. It's the mist and that sort of stuff that really kind
I
of.
always look at it this way. I plant for the bees. I feed the birds.
Mhm.
When they come to my garden, I think they're just coming in there playing around because it's really nothing except roses. And roses aren't that attractive when you've got other highly scented. That's vegetation just for them.
Sure. Yeah, they'll be attracted to what smells and what they can detect. The colors, will really stand out to them. So, yeah, that's good. That's good. So, how do you promote new blooms on your roses? I don't know about y'all, but I want some wow in my garden. Y'all want wow? Anybody want wow in their garden? Yeah, I think everybody does. One way to do that, two ways to do that, is a good fertilization program. And my fertilization program consists of every 6 weeks I fertilize my garden from the time that I prune. When I see that new growth coming out, I begin to fertilize my garden. And I fertilize it alternating organic and inorganic fertilizers. Do it every 6 weeks without fail until about 6 weeks before the first predicted frost, which for us is, it's nothing for us to have fresh roses at Thanksgiving in Alabama. So when do y'all have your first frost here?
About the same time.
About the same time? Yeah. So
Similar, maybe a little bit earlier.
But not much.
yeah. Yeah, so you want to have those that fertilization program going up until about 6 weeks before that first predicted frost. The other way is to deadhead your repeat blooming roses. A lot of people just come out and they'll plant their roses and they're like, well, they don't rebloom, and when they do, they don't do very much. And I'm like, well, do you deadhead them? Well, what's that? But they don't really realize that every time you cut a rose, it's a signal to that plant to begin to regrow. If it's a repeat bloomer, it's going to produce another shoot, which will produce another set of blooms. If it is a once bloomer, after you prune that, after they bloom for the year, and you go back and you begin to prune those, it's a signal for it to put down more roots and strengthen itself and prepare for next year's bloom. So you get that wow in your garden by constant fertilization about every 6 weeks. And I use various types of fertilizers. I use one that I mix up that I get at the Farmers Co-op that my favorite exhibitor back in Birmingham gave me. He calls it Rose Crack. And it is different types of phosphorus and I think it's a 13-13-13 type blend. And you add phosphorus through that and you shake it up in a butter bowl and you put it out. And it'll give you blooms, huge blooms for exhibition. He used it to exhibit and win lots and lots of prizes and trophies. Things like Miracle Grow that you get at the Home and Garden Center works just fine. Composted manures they sell at Lowe's and Home Depot stores, and I'm sure they have it here. It's called Black Cow. It's in a big yellow bag. That works very, very well. Of course, you can do things like this Moo-Poo tea, this alfalfa. I call this a rose snack. You know, roses like variety the way we do. I don't know about you, I just don't want plain chicken all the time. Sometimes I want a steak and sometimes I want, a pork chop. So roses are that way too. They love variety. So I give them a lot of different types of fertilizers in the garden. My main mission is to teach basic rose care. And I'll tell you why I do that. You have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry. So with deadheading roses, does it matter when you deadhead them? Should it be as soon as they're fully blown, cut them off?
Yeah. Usually when the bloom finishes, if it's one bloom per stem and that bloom finishes, then you can deadhead it. I used to grow a lot of floribundas. And we'd have some, and I'll even go in there and snip off some of the blooms and leave the others that are still going into the garden. Now, if you're doing that for exhibition, there are other ways that you can, what I call thumb prune roses, to get them to bloom the way that you want them to. Yes, sir.
We have some roses in our yard that we don't attend, and they get these long shooters.
Yes.
And they don't grow anything. They don't ever get blooms on them. They just cut those off.
Yeah, typically those are called suckers. They kind of have a different leaf formation than the other row. Yeah, that's the Dr. Huey understock that has reared its head. So most roses are grafted on a rootstock. So that is the Dr. Huey, or it could be, anybody grow roses on Fortuniana this far north? You've got some? Yeah. That Fortuniana, those will throw out, I call those suckers. Is that what y'all call them here? What do y'all call them? Yes, blind shoots, suckers. And I go all the way down to the base of the plant and cut it off. Because you're right, it's not going to produce a bloom. And if it does, it'll be different than the one that you think you've got.
I'll have some Dr. Huey if you need some. I've got it potted up and ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good deal. So I'll tell you guys why I travel the U.S. and speak at home and garden shows all across the nation and teach people about basic rose care. And I'll tell you really what just set it in stone for me. We were giving away roses at a botanical garden one day, and I gave a lady a gallon potted rose. And she was a young lady, probably late 20s, early 30s, had a kid in one of those, papoose things, and one on her hip, and her husband had a stroller, and she said, "Does this require water?" And I had the same reaction on the inside, but I thought to myself, we have an entire generation of young people that don't know about horticulture. Even the basics of things need to be watered. They go in the ground. A good soil structure is important in the garden. How to prune. What are some good tools for the garden? That sort of thing. So, you know, I've made it my mission to anytime I get an opportunity to come and talk, even when I talk to seasoned rose people, if for no other reason, let it be a reminder to us all that there is a multitude of people around us that need just very basic rose care. They just need to know how to get that rose in the ground and have some early success with it. Because I don't know about you, once I got a rose that I planted and it actually bloomed, I was like, I got this. You know, I was willing to put in the work to get the rest of it done. And so we've got to be about that business as rose societies and the American Rose Society to be, we are the rose, how many rose experts are here today? Got a couple.
I'm curious somebody to call me an expert.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you, if y'all are members of this society, if y'all aren't the rose experts in this area, I don't know where you're going to find them. You know, I just want to invite you guys to take your place in this community as a rose expert. Because you feel like you don't know it all, well, guess what? There's a whole lot of people don't know anything about growing roses. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. So before I close out today, I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 essential tools for the garden. And can you tell these gloves get used? These are my gauntlet gloves that I use at home, and I probably had these for 10 years. And I use them to protect my arms. And if I rolled up my sleeve long enough, you'd see the scars of the years that I didn't protect my arms. But I use them to prune roses with in my garden. A good pair of gauntlet gloves, a good pair of pruners, bypass pruners. If you use the anvil type pruners, chances are you're going to damage your canes when you prune because they don't make a very clean cut. It is these that bypass one another, make a very sharp cut. These are Felco number 2s, and they have, this is my second pair. My other pair was confiscated in the Denver airport. Can I tell you that when you travel and talk roses, you carry your garden tools with you? And if you forget to take them out of your backpack and don't put them in your check bags, the TSA agent will take them from you. They took that pair, and I probably had them for 20 years. Hurt my feelings. Can I just tell you that? But a good pair of pruners will serve you well in the garden. Every single day I use these in the garden. I'm snipping something, cutting something. And then the Corona Tools has this little mini lopper. And it really helps me when I'm pruning roses in hard pruning in the spring, especially those big canes that you can get in and get to something. The ones that are like, for the ones I use for my crepe myrtles and that kind of stuff are too big and too unwieldy sometimes to get into a tight space, but these smaller ones are do. So if you only have 3 tools in the garden, get a good pair of gloves, a good pair of pruners, and a small set of loppers. And if you want more than that, we have about probably 6 years ago, I had a garden tool company from Holland come to the United States and wanted to talk to me, and they said, we want you to design some garden tools for us. So I designed a line of garden tools, and this is my trowel. It's got a serrated edge on the end of it. That serves multiple purposes. You can cut through some roots with that and help uproot some annuals, perennials, even help unroot some roses, and it'll actually cut the bags of garden soil and that sort of stuff. So I don't know how we would, I'm gonna give this away today. I don't know how we're gonna do a giveaway. How do y'all normally do them? Just give it to you? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we didn't have a signing sheet today, did we?
No, I forgot it.
Oh, Miss Kitty.
Can we pass one around and get folks to sign it? And I've got some paper in my bag, and if y'all go sign up, we'll strip it off and we'll call out winners. And I also want to give away this alfalfa tea today and let you guys try that. You can buy this stuff online. The name of the website is called manuretea.com, and some good stuff. So what other questions did you have?
Well, I had a comment
Okay,
First of all, you had that beautiful rose garden at your home.
I did. Mm-hmm.
Did a rosarian buy that?
Well, a lady that had seen the garden in Southern Living, her daughter lived about a mile from me, and she lived up in Huntsville, Alabama. And when they put the house in like a preview, and she was one of the first ones there, and she wrote in the contract of the house that you must leave the garden exactly intact. You can't take anything. And so I left all my prized roses behind, and can I just tell you that she paid a premium for that? I said, you know, because I was going to dig up about half of those 200 roses and carry them with me.
And your Peggy Martin
Yep.
was so impressive. I've seen other people's Peggy Martin, but
Yeah.
yours was so impressive. I had to have one.
Yeah. How's yours doing?
I can't wait to take a picture of it. It's massive. It's full of blooms. I don't know if it'll look as good as yours did
Yep.
a few years ago. The one
Yep.
that impressed me so much, but I'm trying.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It'll come on along. It really will. And you know, that was one of the roses. You know, there are roses you kind of get attached to, and that was the one that I really wanted because that came from Peggy Martin. She gave me a cutting from hers. And so when I left that rose behind. And when I was at the garden party last weekend in our Rose Society, a guy came up and he said, "You remember those cuttings I took of your Peggy Martin a couple of years ago?" He said, "I potted you up some." So I get to bring Peggy back to the garden at my new house. So.
Yeah, I mean, she was only that big.
Mhm.
Like 3 years later, I'm afraid to guess. I would say she's probably about 20 feet.
Oh yeah, very, very easily. We'll get 20 feet.
Gorgeous. She's going everywhere.
Yeah. And she's kind of hard to train. You just kind of have to put her on a fence and let her do her thing. And I trim her up a couple times a year and she just rewards me every single time. So what other questions do you guys have? Can I just encourage you, if you're not a member of this local Rose Society or a member of the American Rose Society, that you consider that membership. That the folks here will help you to grow roses if you're not already a member. And they are a local source of information, because you know, something I might tell you that would do really well in Alabama may not fly in Richmond. So this is where your local rose groups come in handy. That you get all this, you can Google all day long, and can I tell you, the first time I Googled how to overwinter roses, and the website told me that I had to dig them all up and tip them over and put them in a styrofoam box, I thought, I'm not going to do that. And you know, I was looking at a website in Minnesota, and that's what they have to do to grow roses, but you don't have to do that here. So that's where your local rose groups come into play. It is the camaraderie and support of gardeners right in your own backyard. So I just want to encourage you guys to not only help one another, but to reach out to your communities and encourage other people to grow as well. So that's my program today. I appreciate you all time, and I had a great time. I don't know about y'all. Can I do one more thing? Everywhere I go, I take a selfie, and I'm going to take a group selfie of everybody. So I'm going to turn around and we're going to get a selfie together, and then on the count of 3, I want y'all to point towards the camera, okay? Okay. All right. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Ah! There we go.
Don't walk away yet. Please. I do have manners. Not very often, though.
Don't get out of frame.
Oh.
Are you familiar with Apothecary Rose?
Oh, yes.
There are 5 of them I have potted. They like to just put out runners and go crazy. I don't need but so much of it. So I've got 5 pots, and whoever would like it, please just take some home. It does take up a fair amount of space when it gets bigger, or you can keep it smaller by giving away pieces. And I will have more to dig up in the near future, so if you don't get one today, get in touch with me, and I'll have one for you.
Okay, Miss Kitty.
Yes.
Would you stand up, please? This is the young lady that invited Chris here. Chris Van Cleve. I'll get it right before it's over.
You got it right.
But we appreciate you getting in touch with him. I know she tried last year too, didn't she?
Yep.
And I knew you were going to make it. We're going to get a picture of you two together. Not me in it though.
Why not?
Come on.
I don't know.
You get on the other side of
Would you?
Okay, let me get on the other side.
Well, let's
Yeah, we gotta-
let's put the pretty one in the middle.
Okay. Oh, okay.